quite a packed agenda today with some really important things on there. So we're going to get straight into it. Just to note that we're going to bring together items 4 and 9, which Esther is going to lead on with regards to the high needs subgroup and the specialist resource provision. But before we do that, introduction. So if you haven't been on here before, I don't think we're going to go around the room and do introductions, but I'm chairing here, and Kevin is in charge of all things constitutional and operational, so he will dive in at times as well. Obviously we have Esther White and Rachel Severett Nye as vice chairs as well. Various people will speak at different points. If there are any declarations of interest, rather than go through the rigmarole of do those, just pop those into the chat so that we can do those. Kevin, anything else on point 1?
No, thank you. I'm just going through the attendance at the moment. Just there's an unknown person, blonde-haired lady with the one that just put your hand up. Your name? You're on mute.
Hi, I'm Hazel Moody from Advantage Day Nursery.
Thanks, Hazel. Thank you.
Thanks, Hazel. Welcome.
Thank you.
So we do also have a new member who I had the privilege of sharing a journey at 7 o'clock yesterday morning on the 465 bus yesterday. So welcome to Neil Smith, head teacher at Chessington, not at Chessington, that's quite ironic, at Southborough. Welcome, Neil.
Thank you very much. Actually, it was the K4, actually, not the...
Was it the K4? See, that's why Southborough just edges it. So yeah, welcome to the forum, Neil, and please feel free to join in at any point with any questions that we have. Going to the minutes of the last meeting then, item 3, are there any queries and questions on the minutes of the last meeting? From what I can see, there were no specific actions other than to agree the or talk about the way that the funding is going to happen, but those are going to be happening in items 4 and 9 that we've talked about. So other than that, are there any actions or any exceptions that people want to raise about the minutes? Good. I'm sure you all read them in detail. On to item 4. So this is the feedback from the high needs subgroup. Esther Brooks is going to take the lead on presenting that. There are just some things to note. Welcome, Charlie. That just in terms of previously, we have had the high needs subgroup. We had the task and finish group was looking specifically at how we're going to work with the banded funding and so on. And the action for this is going to be noting how the cluster will be funded. But before we do any of that, I'll hand over to Esther for item 4, which is the high needs block subgroup. And it's Appendix A, if anyone is looking for the paperwork to go with that.
Thank you, Ash. So just a short update from the high needs subgroup. What we have focused on this year is, I think one of the important things to note is that we've adjusted the terms of reference, because as the scope of the group is sort of broadened, we've realised that there's more things that relate to funding that could potentially be being discussed in the high needs group. So, for example, you'll see from the minutes that we've had 2 discussions on therapies, because obviously escalating needs, if there is a shortfall on therapies, links to a higher cost. So that the group has also been looking at that, and OT and speech and language are coming back in the next meeting as well to discuss that. We continue to focus on receiving updates from the implementation of the banding tool. We receive updates on the safety valve and the associated risks with the safety valve, which we're all very aware of, and they're very well minuted in all the papers, and the costs associated with commissioning. When you look at the minutes from the last meeting, you'll see item 4 on A4.5 refers to the cluster model there, and that paper, I believe, is coming. But that paper is where it outlines option 1 and option 2. That paper will be coming in the autumn term for the vote for the implementation. And as Ash has been really clear, there is the cluster group is not coming out from high needs. It's just the funding element that is looked at in high needs. It's not. Some of us from high needs were on the task and finish group. It doesn't mean we are the task and finish group or implementing the cluster model. And I think that's really important to note. You'll also notice from further down on the papers, there's an SRP paper proposed, and that's another element that on that proposal is talking about coming into high need. So I think we just need to be mindful of the scope of the group when we meet 3 times a year to make sure what we do, we do well, because I think following through on the therapies is also quite important to and for us as a borough as well. And that is an update from the high needs, unless there is any questions on the minutes of that group.
Go ahead, Charis.
Not really a question, but I think Esther's point is very valid about the scope and the quite significant pieces of work that group is taking forward. And I think what we've probably got within it are almost 3 task and finish groups or working groups for, or should have, the therapies, SRPs and the cluster model. And then that group can almost be the kind of facilitator or where they report back into in the decision making. I think that's going to work best.
And one thing, just as kind of chair of schools forum, that I was keen on is it feels like some of this, we could get some mission creep into the schools forum thing. And as Esther said, we just want to be really clear that the role of schools forum is only about the funding of the cluster and the people to lead the cluster as well. So I think that just needs to be, you don't want me leading on full borough SEM policy, I promise you. So it'd be for better people to be doing that. And I think that's really important. Esther, sorry.
Yeah, and I think I absolutely agree with everything you and Charles have just said. It's just us being really clear where there is a task and finish group. If members of high needs are on that, we're taking off our high needs hat, as it were, and are there for our send side, and just being really clear on that, because I think that can sort of blur the operational and the high needs forum aspect. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. So essentially, we're noting that the vote on this will be happening in November. We did talk about that being in September, but the consultation, am I right in that, Lucy? And so the reason being that we didn't want the consultation over the summer. That wouldn't be fair to colleagues who've had a very, very busy year. So that will be in November. So it can be noted that that's when the vote will be. If the notes can see everything Esther said, and please pay particular attention to going back to the consultation, and indeed when Esther reissues the paper that was shared in May, it's really important to do. And then our role moving forward will be about the funding for the cluster lead, and indeed whomever that cluster is the purview of those other groups. Any other thoughts, feelings, or questions on that? Okay, so on that, if you wouldn't mind, we'll we'll come back so no luck, Henry, we're not skipping school place planning, but we'll skip and come back to specialist resource provisions and start with that, please, Esther, if that's okay again.
I think this is me, Ash.
Oh, sorry, Scott. Yeah,
no,
thank you, Scott.
So this is on page 53 or F1 in the pack. And as Ash has already stated, it's around special resource provisions. So a number of schools with SRPs have highlighted a potential funding gap between the funding formula and the expenditure at the host school. So the proposal within this report is to increase the SRP funding in the interim by the same increase that we received in the high needs block funding formula, which was 3.39%. This will result in an increase in spend to the high needs block of 132,000 in 2024-25. And 227,000 for a full academic year within the high needs block. And as Esther's already sort of alluded to, we'd agree to a working group to be created to come up with potential new funding methodologies moving forward, obviously working within the current financial envelope. Members of the working group would also need to be chosen from the entire school community rather than just members of the high needs subgroup or members of schools forum. And then the task and finish group would need to feed back, as Esther's already said, into the high needs subgroup, and ultimately will put forward recommendations to the schools forum. So within this report, what we're sort of asking for here is that schools forum agree to the interim increase that we've suggested, and the schools forum agree to setting up this task and finish group with the aim to come up with different funding methodologies moving forward with SRPs.
So any questions on that, particularly focused on the 3.39% change that's recommended in there? Okay, so Lucy and Scott, is this a full vote or is that we agree the recommendation?
It's just agreeing the recommendations, so you can probably do the vote. If anyone doesn't agree, I suspect that's probably the better way to do it.
I'll go to Ian in a sec, but the recommendation I don't believe can come into effect until April 2025, is that correct?
So in terms of the new funding model,
Yeah.
April 2025 is the earliest, but in terms of the annual increase, that would be for this year. Yeah.
Perfect. All right, thank you. Ian Hutchings.
Hi, can I just ask, so I understand this is coming from a selfish perspective, given that Kings Oak has 2 provisions, but from conversations with SEN department, I understand that some SRPs have got a more recent SLA that means that their shortfall is less than some that have got a more historic SLA. So is there a fairer way of distributing that funding based on actual shortfall rather than giving everyone a blanket 3.3%?
So the SLA and the funding that's associated within those SLAs, each SRP is funded in a similar way. So the SLA doesn't affect the funding necessarily. You're right, Ian, that some SLAs, a lot of the SLAs are up for renewal, and this is a good opportunity for us to change that methodology and set up this working group. But actually, if you look at the similar designations between an SRP at Kings Oak and an SRP with a similar designation somewhere else, the actual funding should be exactly the same for those SRPs. There shouldn't be any differences.
Okay, thank you. But just so Schools Forum is aware, so from a Kings Oak perspective, we're about £100,000 adrift on the funding we receive facing towards the costs of running the SLP. So I totally appreciate that we can't make a decision right now because the funding isn't there, but there does need to be a drastic change. But if 3% is all we can get at this point, then obviously that's what we have to take.
So I think my understanding of the 3% is that that's essentially commensurate with the increase in the high needs funding block. Is that right? Okay. And have we got any intent soon to look at, because this was a question Yolanda had as well, around the SLAs on the SRPs and the kind of cost effectiveness of each one of them? So obviously some of them, when they got to year 5, not that I'm sat right next to one, that's in year 5, will obviously that doesn't matter. Is there an intent to sort of look at, regulate or sort of reconstruct those SLAs, or when the new funding formula comes in April 2025? And then, yes, sorry, to Sophie.
Sorry, no, just in answer to your question, yes, the SLAs need to be looked at in conjunction with the new funding methodology.
And how will we do that? Will there be an opportunity for heads and leads of SRPs to be involved in that? Okay,
yes,
fantastic.
Certainly. Yeah,
that's really good, because that's what Yolanda was asking me to do in there. So obviously for now we're looking at that 3.39% while we have the 6 months between when this happens in September and then April, or 7-8 months. And then, okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Sorry, Sophie Kavanagh. Sorry to gargle on.
No, not at all. I just wanted to support some of the points that Ian's made, having an SRP ourselves. I mean, I'm really pleased to see that there is an increase. That's really welcome and appreciated, albeit at 3.39%, but it doesn't really come close to the costs of the SRP, because one of the challenges is around the cost of staffing and the model of financing the SRPs in terms of the staff that you have, and the rates that are calculated within that formula don't reflect, for at least I would suggest 10 years, the incremental increases and the pay rises that have happened. So whilst we appreciate, this is a positive step forward and the Working Party will be looking at this, there is a huge gap between the realities of what it's actually costing schools to run these on behalf of the local community, and what actually we're receiving, and that tension is really keenly felt because of the challenges we're having more broadly in the wider budget. So it's welcome, but it doesn't go anywhere near far enough.
Thanks, Sophie. Esther?
Is that Esther Brooks?
Sorry, thanks.
So I fully agree with everything Ian and Sophie have said. I think all of us with SRPs know the pressure it pulls on the main school budget as well. I just wanted to raise one note, and it wasn't within Charis, correct me if I'm wrong there, Peter Gray's work didn't look at SRPs, did it? But I know one of the things I often talk to you, Scott, about is when we compare the cost of an SRP place to, say, a special school place, but we recognise that we don't get the benefits of the economies of scale of being a special school. And I think most SRPs would be in that. So I think looking at that quite deeply next year, I think is the right thing to do.
When will we, thank you, Esther. Lucy, Scott, when will we have the broad outline and formulae for the new funding in April 2025? I assume earlier, before April 2025, I assume we get that formula. And I recognise apparently there's been some changes in education leadership at government level recently. But I think what we're saying is the 3.39% is, it's a sort of, nice crumb from the high needs budget, but fundamentally we're asking as a forum if we could then have a more thorough look, at what is now a £6 million budget. And from what I'm hearing, there are people around this table, virtual table, that would want to be involved in that and look at, and at least understand, A, why it is the way it is, B, what we can be doing, what the rationalisation opportunities are, and then the greater need. So I think if it can be noted that that's a meeting we'd like possibly after Christmas to get that in, and a stream that we'd like, that would be really helpful and could answer what we've got there. Lucy Corpus had her hand up first, then Rachel.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, so I think that's the purpose of setting up this task and finish group, which will be a group of, heads or school business managers. It can be, sort of a mix of professionals to actually look at what the alternative funding models could look like. And then, to make a recommendation on which one would be best suited to Kingston. So there isn't a mandate from the DFE around how SRPs are funded. We obviously, in AFC, we need to make sure it's sort of fair and equitable. I think just in terms of managing expectations, there is no additional money for SRPs. And I know that's a really difficult message. So we're going to have to sort of manage within our means or look at where money could be reprioritised within the high needs block. So I think, again, the task and finish group probably needs to look kind of at that piece of the story as well, in terms of, how do we kind of best spend the high needs money that we have for the borough.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think colleagues are aware that we get that, but I think that reallocation and reprioritisation is a really good outcome of that. Rachel?
I was just going to reiterate, there are loads we've got to S3 SRPs as well. So there are lots of us here with SRPs, and I think we all agree. However, I think we also need, it links to some of the other things as well. So therapies is a big part of our SRPs. And actually, we are commissioning quite a lot of therapies because we can't get therapies that we need. And maybe that's not very efficient. So we need to look at, so it links to some of the other groups too that are looking at therapies to try and look at efficiencies there maybe as well.
Agreed. Thank you, Rachel. Anything else from anyone else on that with the so we are saying then that we're going to go to a vote in a minute, but is there anything else that anyone wants to raise on SRPs and the funding? Okay, so if there is anyone, please raise your hand virtually if you do not wish the amount to go up in line with the high needs inflation of 3.39%. Anyone that doesn't raise their hand, it will be assumed that they're pro the increase of 3.39%. Obviously, we would want more. So, anyone against?
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Thank you, everyone. And Lucy, Scott, we'll work on exactly how we can set that meeting up and getting those people in there. But then again, once we've done it as an action from this meeting, I'll step back because it's not the purview specifically of, yeah, okay. Okay, the next agenda item is school place planning. So obviously this is key item and one that we're all very interested in, not that we're not interested in all of them, and one that we can do. So Henry is going to produce some or talk through exactly what's been happening. We've received the papers. Just for note, I asked for some follow-up papers which Henry very kindly sent around yesterday, which I'll ask Kevin, if you don't mind, to send and distribute with the minutes of this meeting so that everyone's got those. Obviously, this is going to be, it is a subject that raises emotion, and it's to do with our school's funding and our school's futures. Just if we could note that much of the planning that happened here happened before Henry started in September. I think that's important, that historic, but obviously Henry is now responsible for that, so we can ask those questions of Henry and really interrogating to an extent the data that we've got. So I'll hand over to Henry if we can give him the opportunity to speak, and then I'll go to the many questions that I'm sure that we have.
Thanks, Ash. Thanks ever so much for that introduction. That's really helpful to give that context. I've met a lot of you, but for those who haven't met, I'm Henry Kilpin. I'm the Associate Director for School Place Planning and Achieving for Children. And as Ash said, I'm here to provide an update on school place planning over the last 12 months in Kingston. For those of you who are unfamiliar with my role, at a very basic level, I'm essentially trying to ensure that Kingston meets its statutory duty to provide sufficient school places. So that means enough places, but not too many. As Ash said, I'm assuming you've read the report, so I'm just going to give a very brief overview of what's included within it. And then there's some time for questions at the end. And if anything comes up after the meeting, please do just drop me a line and we can have a chat about it. So I'll start looking at primary schools. So essentially at the moment, we've got too many places. The local context is that we've had a decrease in primary applications since 2015. They're down by over 400 in Kingston. Current primaries in Kingston are around 93.1% occupancy level, and we've got 942 vacancies across all year groups. We have high in-year applications, and that's helping to mitigate the lower numbers to some extent. Around 60% of those in-year applications are either from abroad or new to the borough, so they require a place rather than ones moving within the borough. Interestingly, not all schools in Kingston are affected. Some are still at 100% capacity and oversubscribed, particularly in the North Kingston, Tolworth, Berrylands and New Malden, Coombe area. So it's not, those sort of lower numbers isn't being felt by everyone. In terms of the wider context, as I'm sure you all know, falling rolls is a growing issue in London. The main sort of reasons for this relate to the decreasing birth rate in London, and because some families have made the decision to move away as a result of Brexit, COVID, cost of living crisis, or the lack of affordable housing. It's less of an issue in Kingston and southwest London more generally than other areas. Inner London boroughs are a lot more affected, but obviously this is still something we really do need to be mindful of. As a result of that, we've established an AFC falling roles group within Achieving for Children. That includes Charis and colleagues from admissions, school improvement and finance. We've recently shared a position statement in Schools News, which sets out our approach going forward and how we support our schools, and we'll provide an update on that every 6 months to sort of say what we're doing and what we're looking at. In terms of what we're doing at the moment to manage this, we're continuing with our temporary removal of forms of entry for September 24. So for this year, we've got 9 forms of entry coming out of 8 schools, which is an increase of 6 FE from 5 schools last year. Depending on what happens in the next few years, we're going to have to take more permanent action potentially. So we'll keep an ongoing view of that and keep working with those schools that are struggling. In terms of secondary schools, it's the opposite, essentially. We haven't got enough places. We've got consistently high demand. Applications have increased by over 12% since 2015. We're consistently having to over-offer to enable us to meet demand for places, and that relies on the goodwill of our schools, and can be risky if the numbers don't fall back to the published admission number. We've had a trend of unplaced children on National Offer Day in recent years. This is obviously when we're unable to make any offers to children due to lack of capacity. We haven't got any for September 24 entry, but that was expected because we've got a normal year 6 cohort coming through. So the current year 6 cohort is 65 pupils lower than the current year 5 cohort, which indicates that we'd expect that pressure places to go up again. In terms of capacity, schools are full. We've got over 100% occupancy rate across all year groups. We've seen very, very big increases in year 7 numbers and the number on roll across all year groups in the last few years. We've had 10% in Kingston since 2020, and that equates to 864 pupils on roll in extra. Kingston schools remain very popular with out-of-borough families. We've got around 27% of our pupils in secondary schools from out of borough, and schools in neighbouring boroughs aren't as popular with our families. So Kingston remains a net importer of pupils. As at primary level, we've had high in years, 64% increase since 2021. And of those, around 45% from abroad or new to the borough. So again, they require a place as opposed to those who are moving within schools in the borough. September 24, we do have some remaining vacancies at some of our schools, but overall we're expecting to be largely full for September 24, which puts us in a really difficult position when we're managing those high in-year applications, as we've got limited capacity for additional pupils. And obviously that puts schools in a really difficult position, having to accept pupils where there's not space. In terms of our specialist provision, we've had a huge growth in in-borough specialist places since 2011, an 83% increase. We work very closely with the 2 main providers in the borough, so that's Orchard Hill College and Academy Trust, and Ambitious About Autism. We've established 18 SRPs in our mainstream schools in Kingston, and as you know, they enable pupils with SEND to access the mainstream curriculum with specialist intervention. As a result of that growth in places, the proportion of in-borough children on roll in special schools has increased over the last 5 years, and that's in line with our ambition in the SEND Futures plan to educate more of our children with SEND locally. Despite that increase in places, we still need more places, and we're working with the trust to try and create more places in the borough. So that's a sort of current situation with regards to our provision. In terms of what we're expecting going forward, as I'm sure you're aware, we regularly undertake forecasting to try and help us to understand what we may need in terms of school places. The methodology we use is approved by the Department for Education, and our accuracy is checked annually and shows us to compare well to national figures and other neighbouring local authorities. It is really, really important, though, to emphasise that forecasts are just a tool to give an indication of what might happen. There's no absolute certainties, as things can and do change. We're also in the midst of a period of unprecedented change at the moment in terms of Brexit, COVID, etc. Not to mention the recent change of governments. That makes school place planning a lot more difficult and unpredictable than perhaps has been in previous years. We're currently working on our school capacity return at the moment, and that is indicating that at primary level, we're expecting numbers to fluctuate over the next few years, but with no significant increase or decrease. So those current levels of surplus are likely to remain, but not get worse. Secondary and SEND, we're going to looking at a continued shortfall of places as we'd expect. Lots of development planned in Kingston, as I'm sure you're all aware. Our forecasts only include those developments that have been approved, as that's the advice of the Department for Education. It's going to be interesting to see what the drive for house building by the new government has in terms of the speed of development in the borough, because I'm aware that lots is planned, but it's not always at the pace that you'd necessarily expect. I also do appreciate there's been lots of questions around pupil yield over the past few years. Partly in response to that, we've committed to doing a review of pupil yield over the next 12 months, but probably sooner rather than later. And we've got some additional resource to do that within AFC. So that's going to be looking at the new DFE pupil yield calculator, the existing GLA calculator, and our own current formula, and look at those and work out which is the most appropriate for Kingston. We're also going to be liaising with planning colleagues to ensure we've got the most up-to-date information in terms of the timing and phasing of the developments of the build. And we're then going to try and map that out going forward. So hopefully that will make things a bit clearer about what should be happening and when. In terms of plan new provision, as you see from the report, we've got a lot planned and a lot going on. I'm very, very aware that heads and other people in the community have expressed concerns about plans to open the new schools when they're in the midst of lower pupil numbers, and I do completely get that. I suppose from the information we've got at the moment, the need for those new schools is still there, but I suppose we need to, again, re-emphasise that we regularly review that. Just because we've committed to providing the school doesn't mean we're not going to keep constantly review that and work with the DFE to make sure that that need remains. It's also worth mentioning that, as with all new provision, we'd only open it when we know it's not going to negatively impact on our other schools, and when we know that demand for places is there, and any opening would be phased. So in terms of what we've got planned, of the 2 new primaries, the future of the Norbiton site, which is currently being used by the Spring School, is still being considered by the DFE. That's in light of us AFC expressing concerns about the sites. Those conversations are ongoing, and hopefully by the end of the year, we'll get a clear idea of what's going to happen with that site. In terms of the Surbiton site, no work's commenced on the site, and we still haven't got a date for it to start. So at the very, very earliest, the building will be ready in September 26. But again, as I said earlier, we'd make sure that any new school opening is at the right time and it's not going to negatively impact other schools. In terms of the new secondary that's been planned at Kingsmeadow, planning application is in, but we still haven't got a date confirmed for the committee. That means we've missed the window for translocating the slow worms, which is an area I didn't think I'd get into in this role, but that means that's going to cause a further delay. At the very, very earliest, the school would be open in September 27. But given the speed at which other DFE-led projects are proceeding, I suspect that's probably going to be a little bit optimistic, to be completely honest. And even if it did open then, with a phased opening, it wouldn't admit all year groups until 2032. In terms of SEND provision, we're full steam ahead with a new vocational centre at St Philip's, which is really, really fantastic. And we've got another couple of projects at feasibility stage. I'm conscious that's a very, very whistle-stop tour of school place planning. So in terms of my AFC main priorities going forward, it's going to be supporting those primary schools with falling roles, looking at those contingency plans for SEND where projects are delayed, continuing to monitor the need for the new schools and having those conversations with the DFE and pushing forward with other ongoing projects. Thank you for listening. Hope that's been useful. And are there any questions?
Henry, thank you very, very much for that. I'm guessing there's going to be a queue, so I'm going to remind myself how to open the queue. And first off the gun, Sophie Kavanagh.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Henry. You know, crystal ball gazing is a very difficult sport to play, but, you know, that's what we've got. Just a few things. Is there any consideration for the 20% VAT being applied to private schools, and what the local authority are seeing or anticipating in the kind of flow out of primary into state? I know that Surrey has reported hundreds, if not thousands, of inquiries. So I'm just interested to know whether that's being kind of looked at as a potential threat, if you like, to the capacity we have in our secondary schools. And it'd be interesting to know from either the secondary or the primary position, what's the legal position on them actually being pulled? Is that a decision for DFE that they may determine that one, neither, or both are not viable anymore?
So to start with the first question, in terms of the independent schools, we are monitoring that to see what might happen. And I suppose at this stage, we're not entirely clear how it's going to be implemented, so what that impact will be. But we have had more inquiry. Our admissions team have had more inquiries from families currently in the independent sector asking about the process if they were to move into the state-funded sector. But at the same time, we've also been made aware of WhatsApp groups encouraging parents in the independent sector to make inquiries to put a bit of pressure on. So I suppose at the moment we're monitoring it. We don't know any more until it's a bit clear about how that's going to be implemented. But obviously that may well have an impact in Kingston, and we need to be mindful of that going forward. In terms of the secondary, primary new provision, the legal position, as I understand it, it would be with the DFE. They would make that decision as to proceed or not proceed. Yeah, I think it would sit with them.
And you know, evidently they built the Norbiton school, and now that's in question. And you made reference to it, something around concerns about the site. Is it about the site and its suitability to function as a primary school, or is it about the viability of it full stop?
It's probably to do with the site. We visited it, and I suppose as AFC we have questions about how it would operate as a primary school in terms of mainly related to the outdoor space. There's very little outdoor space on the ground floor, and they've got two spaces on the roof, one of which is currently not usable because the fence on one side isn't high enough, so it's a health and safety risk. So I suppose for us it's more around the site at the moment. That we've been, as I said, had a conversation with the DFE about it, but we're waiting on a ministerial decision about what to do with that. So we're as in the dark about that at the moment as everyone else is.
No, I appreciate the update. It beggars belief, doesn't it, that the DFE can put millions into a school and build and design something that's then not fit for purpose.
Exactly.
Thanks, Sophie. Councillor Shaper, I know you've got your hand up, but Charis, was yours in response to one of Sophie's questions? Would you mind if we went to Charis, if that's okay?
No, it was just really quickly to say, I think the concerns about the site, what was originally proposed, Sophie, was a 2 form-entry primary school. And having visited the site as it is now, I think those are the flags that we raised to the DfE, 420 children aged 4 to 11 on that site, drop-offs and all the rest. So that was the initial concern we raised, and we have worked with, and also the fact that at this point in time, North Kingston does not need any additional primary places at this point in time. So those are the 2 points we've made to them. We have talked about future use and what might, what we do and what we don't need locally, and some of the opportunity for them to come back has been delayed by a change of minister. So I feel we've made a very strong local position, but we are waiting for the new minister to, and that's where the decision rests. So DfE put all the paperwork together. The decision is made by the minister. I suspect it's not Sophie, but that's the answer that we get in terms of decision making.
Thanks, Charis. Yeah, I'm sure Gillian Keegan had that right at the top of her list. Councillor Shaper, if I've said that right. Apologies.
Oh, hello, thank you. Oh, hi, Ash. No, being a newbie to the fourth, I've just got probably a really quick question. Henry, thanks for the report. On page 11, 6.2, I was trying to get my head around what it meant, where it talks about a gradual reduction in the number of surplus places in primary schools, but a slow, steady increase in reception pupils. I wasn't quite sure I got that and wondered if you wouldn't mind just clarifying that. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. So when we did the last SCAT return in 2020, SCAT school capacity return in 2023, that was suggesting that the reception numbers were going to very, very gradually increase over the next few years, which means the number of surplus places would go down. We've subsequently, as I said, we're working on the forecasting at the moment, and the picture's looking slightly different now. It's more suggesting there's going to be a bit of up and down, but then overall numbers the surplus is going to remain relatively similar. So yeah, hopefully that explains.
Yeah, no, thank you. And as you say, is it aligned quite a lot with the idea that when you're looking at your forecasting for demand, that actually it's about looking at that local infrastructure and what that will look like? Yeah, very much so. And it includes lots of different variables. So it's quite a complicated methodology. But as I said, it's one of the methodologies we use is approved by the DfE. And yeah, we rate highly in terms of accuracy. Thanks, Henry.
Okay. Rachel, 7-9.
Mine was just a quick question. Does pupil yield mean that you're looking at whether the new housing is actually going to have children in it?
Yeah. Essentially, it's looking at new developments, the number and type of new unit being created. We've got a formula that enables us to work out what the expected number of children will be from that development who will require a new place in school. So it's just trying to work out, say we're building 800 units. Of that, how many children do we expect are going to come from that provision requiring primary places, requiring secondary places? So it enables us to plan a bit, but it is a very complicated calculation, plus you're relying on information released by planning and developers, and it's not always that clear. So as I said, we want to do a bit more work around that to try and be as clear as we can be about what's going to be happening when, or at least what do we expect to happen when.
Because there's a big issue here, isn't there, about affordable housing as well? So we are still seeing, families being rehoused and all of that kind of thing out of Borough.
Yeah.
So yeah,
it does. The calculation does break it down into types of housing, which enables and the calculation suggests that there's more families likely to be coming from this more social housing. So it does take that into account. But yeah, we do need to consider wider sort of inward and outward migration in that as well.
Thank you. In your crystal ball.
Yes.
Okay, Esther Brooks.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Henry, for that and for your details around the forecast. One of the things I was interested in is the methodology, and I know that's checked by the DfE, but you also mentioned, and we know a number of moving parts in terms of change of government, Brexit, and we're seeing children leaving at secondary school, moving away. Do we know if there's any, I know that the methodology is checked and it's found to be sound because it meets the DfE methodology. But with all those moving parts and those changes taking place, does not the DFE methodology also need a review, given those changes politically and everything, to give us confidence that we're not putting our secondary schools at great risk? And my second question, sorry, forgive me, Henry, just so
No, not at all, not at all.
You said that the secondary would phase in over years, but there was no mention of, say, a reduced planning in the first instance for, say, year 7, in line with, because the risk to the other secondary schools. You can't just suddenly reduce all your staffing with 1 year's notice, if placed planning is not as doesn't materialise as per the forecast. Thank you.
So in terms of methodology, as I said, it is approved by the DFE, and the DFE do review it as part of the school capacity return each year. Internally within AFC, as I mentioned, in terms of pupil yield, I've got a little bit of extra resource for my forecasting, which is really helpful, so we can go out and have a look at how other boroughs are doing it, what the best approach to that is. The DFE produce local authority scorecards each year that look at the accuracy of our forecast based on actual numbers 1 year ahead and then 3 years ahead. And since 2015, when the scorecards were introduced, we've been, as I mentioned earlier, consistently in line with, if not better than, other local authorities. So that provides us some assurance that we are accurate in what we're predicting. That's not to say we're complacent. As I said, we want to look at it ourselves and try and understand what we can do to improve it. And this year, for our school capacity trend this year, we've made some changes to the methodology because we have to continually be reviewing it, and do our own sort of checks internally to check the accuracy of that. So it is a constantly reviewed process. And in terms of the new secondary school, the schools will be phased in. New school would be phased in, but when we get nearer, we would be having those conversations about looking at the plan for year 7. No decisions around that would have been made at this stage. So I suppose that would continually be reviewed, because it's not in the interest of AFC to do anything that would negatively impact on our schools. We want to support our schools and help them to thrive as much as possible. So yeah, we'd have those conversations to make sure that it's open when it's needed and not before.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ian, just before you jump in, can I just say something? Henry, having spoken to someone at the DFE last week, they still haven't changed their baseline formula since 2020, when the world changed. So while we might be accurate on those, the baseline formula are fundamentally the same baseline formula they were. Is that right?
Well, I suppose
as in, they've not factored in COVID, they've not factored in the change in foreign things, they've not factored in the 7.5 million birth rate going down to 6.9 million. They haven't factored all those changes in. So while we might be doing well, my understanding is we're doing well at a test that exists.
No. We assess that. We use the latest available data. Our forecasting is based upon actual numbers, so that takes into account things that happened in the last few years.
Their scorecard is fundamentally the same as it was in 2015.
It is, but their scorecard only they basically look at the number on roll compared to what we predicted. So there's.
All I'm saying is, I suppose what I'm saying is, I challenge the premise that the DFE is the right thing that we judge ourselves on. I would trust you more than I trust the DFE.
I suppose it's triangulating that information, and looking at what we know, what they know, and making sure that we're predicting as accurately as we can in times of unpredictability, essentially.
Yeah, it's just to say that, saying the DFE's thing sounds like we're doing the right thing, but I don't think that's as accurate as maybe some of what you're doing is. Ian?
Hi, sorry, Henry, I just wanted to know, I know the competition process was out for this provider to run the Norbiton primary. Did that get announced as who the provider will be?
No, because of the ongoing conversations with the DFE about the future of the site, that's been put on hold. I think they got to the point where they assessed it and had a provider in mind, but nothing has been announced because, as we mentioned earlier, we don't know as yet what's going to happen with it.
Okay, thank you.
Charis, did Henry answer it there? Okay. Any more questions on that item? I do have a few myself, sorry, Henry, but I wanted to give others the opportunity to ask them first. Okay, so one thing you were saying around, Henry, there is the high number of in-year applications from abroad. My understanding of much of that has come from sort of Hong Kong at this point, and there has been migration. They've come to Kingston because we're an awesome area with good or better schools. I suppose just for Forum, have we any confidence that that is not just a one or two off, that is sustainable?
Really good question. There's nothing at the moment that would indicate that those in years are going to drop off. It's not solely families from Hong Kong. I have to go away and pull together the exact figures, but that's just one section of the cohort. It's families from all over the place, to be honest. And as you said, because the schools are good, I think Kingston probably continue to attract pupils who are looking to move from abroad. But we do look at that and look nationally to see if there's any information to try and inform what we can expect to happen when. And if you come across in your role anything that sort of gives any indication of that, please do share with us, because as I said, we want to pull together the most accurate information we can to predict as accurately as we can what's going to happen.
And how many in the justification for the increase in places for secondary schools, there's a talk about them not getting places. How many are currently unplaced and for say more than a month down to admin reasons?
I think there's, in terms of from abroad, I think there's 11 young people that are currently unplaced at the moment.
But is that because they've been turned away by schools, or they just haven't got through the process yet?
We're trying to find them places at the moment, as I understand it.
But there's no one that's gone to FAT that's been rejected?
Not that I'm aware of at this stage.
That's the process thing. So there are no unplaced ones based on two people turning them around. I just think
not at this stage.
So at this point, we're saying schools have been flexible and been able to be managed and be agile to increase their numbers to ensure that those people are met.
Yeah, I suppose that the risk is there's going to come a point at which schools are at capacity, and we're going to struggle to find places, as I said, because from year 7, from September, we're going to be full or thereabouts.
And that's interesting that you say that, because one of the other heads asked me to ask around net, because what we've got is the amount of children coming in and the amount of children there, but what we haven't got, so there's one local school where there are 17 children leaving this year, 11 of them moving away internationally, and the other 6 moving to places like Derby and places like that. So have we factored those in? Have we got those trends analysis? Are those included in the figures?
Inward and outward migration is included in the forecasting to an extent, but we can certainly say it does look like we've got higher numbers.
Are they?
They're not, no. I suppose it's an ever-moving feast, isn't it? I suppose, but if there's things like that, we can certainly go and look at it.
I think what I'm asking for then, any papers moving forward, if we could have those included with this many left the borough this year, this many left the borough last year, and then that we've just got that information at hand to be able to sort of then put it in there.
Yeah, we can go away and look at what we can do around that, because it's not necessarily as straightforward as that. But as I said in the presentation, overall, Kingston remains a net importer.
I would imagine that all heads will be very keen and happy if you said that we had to report termly how many have left. We'd be very happy to do that if that would support this.
Thanks, Ash.
Just a couple of other bits. You said this year we're this year, am I right in saying that we have placed all children this year, haven't we?
We have, yeah. This is the first year for about 3 or 4 years we haven't had any unplaced.
And the drop in that this year was about 60 children, wasn't it?
Yeah, because the year 6 the current year 6 cohort going to year 7 was around 60 lower than previous year.
I think it's worth noting for those schools that are increased, that's like 450 grand across those 60 kids, and that's quite a lot of money. That just what seems like a small number is, but that's a significant amount and way more than any one school is going to get from the 1.5 billion that comes from VAT. So I think School Forum needs to note that when we're talking about relatively small numbers of children like 60, the significant increase that has on people as well. Just a couple more from me. You said around the primary schools that roughly it will remain as it is and they won't get worse. So with that in mind and linking to what you said in terms of the right time and the new schools, I can't see how the 2 new schools would be needed if you're saying we've gone down by 9 forms of reception, and that's gone down even more since last year, and then you're predicting that to hold. I suppose perhaps mathematically I'm not there, but I don't see how that works immediately for the need. So I'm guessing that your response might say then in response to the new builds. So is that possible delay going to happen?
It's not just, I suppose it's worth thinking that the fall in numbers isn't consistent across the borough. It varies considerably, and we still have some areas within Kingston where there's high demand for places, and we're predicting a shortfall of places in some of our planning areas. So we're not going to be meeting the statutory duty in some of those areas. We're not going to place those areas. And obviously with the primary schools, families are less willing to travel as far. So it's all about those local areas really, and understanding that it's not the same across the whole borough. So it's within, there's going to be pockets within the borough where we do still need those places.
So how does that sit with your declaration that we wouldn't do anything to harm other schools? Because surely in those high yield areas, which will mostly be central Kingston and North Kingston, compared to the south of the borough and compared to the borders in the borough, if we're adding schools there, we are fundamentally damaging the other schools, aren't we?
No, but we'd only add the schools where that demand is there. And as I said, we're expecting shortfall of places with the current development, and then with that additional development, that's going to make the situation worse. There'll be a number of primary school pupils who won't be getting any of their preferences.
No, but they still be getting a school in a borough where they're all good or better, right?
Although with primary schools, it's about distance, isn't it? And it's going to, we can't place, or families are going to be less likely to accept a school that's a long way away from where they live, because families want to go to a primary school in the local community. With secondary schools, the net gets wider, but at the primary level, they want to go locally. So it's going to put us in a really difficult position.
So what I'm hearing then is it's not just a borough. We're not working together as a borough on this. It's also about local areas.
We are working as a borough, but sure, I suppose surplus places in the south of the borough isn't going to help us at primary level, isn't going to help us meet need in the north of the borough, because those families wouldn't be willing to travel that far.
It's good to have that clarity. Thank you. Charis?
Just to say, we've been very clear in all DFE recent conversations about that there is currently not a need for additional primary places in our borough. Made that very clear in all the meetings that we've had.
And at secondary?
Well, as you will see from Henry's figures, moving forward, we do think moving forward that at some point, based on all the things that Henry shared to you, we do think moving forward that there will be a need for more secondary. But, you know, we've all talked about the complexities. All we can do is look at, and Henry has shared with you, as you know, the information that we have and what that leads to. At this point in time, we've been very clear with the primary message, and at some point, whether it's 28, 29, Esther's offered, said, can you do a reduced year 7 PAN? Those are all conversations as you get anywhere near, which is years, a possible opening phase. Those are all the conversations that you have to have. And we do have as robustly as we possibly can, because, you have meetings with the DFE who do not understand the local context. We need to give them that local context to help their decision making.
Thank you, Charis. Thank you, Henry, for that. Are there any other questions on there that anyone has about that? And thank you, Henry. I know it's not an easy conversation to have with people.
It's really helpful. And if, as I say, if other questions come up, do let me know, because I suppose we want to make sure that we're robust in our thinking around the needs of the new schools, and anything else. Yeah, any other questions or anything, just let me know.
So all that's required from Forum is to note Henry's presentation, and of course to thank you as well, Henry, for that. Thank you. Okay, moving on to our next agenda item, which is the irony, which is Falling Roles Fund. Who's presenting on this one? I've forgotten, Scott. I've lost my name.
Hi there, that's me. So I'll introduce myself. Hello everyone, I'm Mel Hanson. I'm the school's finance business partner for Achieving for Children. I've not been to this forum before, so nice to meet you all virtually. So Falling Roles Fund we did a consultation in response to some new DFE guidance that was released earlier this year. Around the falling roles, which is a national problem. And so over the summer, we did a consultation with schools about, there's no extra additional funding, but DFE have released guidance on what we could do about setting up a fund if we wanted to reprioritise some of our underspend. So in Kingston, there was an underspend of 172,000 on the 23-24 growth fund. So we consulted with schools, 2 options. One was to do no falling roles fund, and the underspend is repaid using the normal methodology, which is what has happened every year prior. And option 2 is to reallocate this underspend to schools using some clear methodology for schools that are struggling with falling roles. There's one piece of mandatory criteria that the DFE insist upon, and that is based on the SCAP, the school capacity data, that those places will be needed within 3 to 5 years. So that would be one mandatory criteria for any school benefiting from the school's falling roll fund. The other criteria is ultimately up to schools forum to decide, but we did consult with schools. We modelled criteria based on sort of DFE guidance. And the feedback, I think the overwhelming feedback is that schools are in support of a fund, but not with the criteria that we modelled in the consultation. There's detailed responses were sent out, I believe, the summary of detailed responses. So you can see this within the support for the fund, there is an idea that the criteria would need to be tweaked. And there was a split also between the primary responses and the secondary responses. Primary were much more in favour, I think, in their responses than the secondary, but that reflects the current situation of where the falling rules are. So I think it's ultimately obviously a decision for schools forum to decide whether they want a fund, and if they do, then what the criteria will be. As we know from the feedback from the schools, they're very split on the criteria in its current format. So it might be that there is an option to consult further over the summer on the criteria if schools forum wanted a bit longer to decide on that. But yeah, so that we've had the feedback from the schools, and it's all outlaid here. So hopefully you've had a chance to read the report and have a look through that. But there was a high response level as well from schools on this. So it's clearly something that is in need of, in part of a lot of the schools are in support of it, but it's clearly a high topic, high agenda. So, and also to say that if schools forum decided not to set up the falling roles fund this year, then we could obviously rediscuss that next year. But there is the 172,000 underspend on the growth fund that has currently not been redistributed. So that would be what we'd be using this time. And then we would use any criteria if the decision was to go ahead with the fund, we would model the criteria that was decided upon, and then that would affect the amount of schools that may benefit and how much they would receive.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Melanie on that? Okay. I thought there'd be more discussion. With that, really, I think I've spoken to a number. Thank you, Esther. Go on.
Just to reiterate, my understanding, Melanie, from what you've said and also from other pre-meets that we've had, is that whilst the voting might have been high for agreement of the fund, it's the methodology that then would be the bit that we possibly need to debate. That remains the case. Yeah,
and I think it's clear from the responses that even though a lot of people have said yes, they're not saying yes to what we've modelled. So if forum were to agree it, the criteria would still need to change from what we sent out. But we had to sort of model something based on the DFE guidance.
Yes, and I think the comments there are all quite interesting, aren't they, and to consider in the methodology.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there was definitely some feedback around the PAN. So currently we had it set at 95%, but there was definitely a few responses that I read that would want that reduced, maybe to 90% or lower. And certainly I've spoken with a lot of schools about this as well. And the surplus balance was another area where of the criteria that had a lot of feedback. Certain schools felt that was unfair, or there should be more detail around what their surplus balance is ring-fenced for and things before that was just ruled out.
I think what we're talking about here is exactly the same thing. I think 65.5% of people, according to the consultation, have agreed with it, and that's a reasonable turnout. It's not Brexit-like, so I think that's clear. But what's been clear is that people disagree on the methodology. Having spoken to feedback from south of the Borough cluster, there are a couple of primary schools who had worked really, really, really hard to not have a deficit, and this is devil's advocate, that therefore it disincentivizes people to work really hard at their budget, and actually it's a perverse incentive to have a deficit in order to spend more money on the kids, which is what we all want to do, and then claw some of that. So I believe what I'm reading from here, hearing from you, Melanie, is that we can agree in principle the concept of a falling roles budget and allocation, but we need to work in the next sort of 10 to 12 weeks to make sure that we have a methodology that works and doesn't do that. So if Forum are happy, what I would suggest is that we work on some different ones with those that have raised some of the issues, work on what that might look like, come back to Forum in September, but then we must vote on it in September so that we can access the 172,000 and can deploy that to people, which is going to annoy people because of course they can't budget for it, but nonetheless it's better than kicking it down the road all the time. So Lucy, Scott, is there any reason why we couldn't do what I just suggested? And when I say what I suggested, basically what you told me to suggest when we had our pre-meeting.
Yeah, no, and what I suggest is we obviously issue a summer consultation that will go out in the next few days. We're not expecting you to look at it in the next few days, though we know you'll be looking at it on the other side of the summer holiday. And perhaps in there we'll include some criteria, so we actually have schools' views on which criteria, you know, you guys like or don't like.
I think it needs to have a prioritisation along the side of surplus, of the number of underpan, and then the percentage distribution. Those three key things, and then anything more than that, it's a horse created by a committee, right? And we don't want that. So I think if we have those three key things, that will do that. So is there anyone with any objection to having the consultation now, agreeing in principle the concept, but not agreeing in a full vote until we have an agreed upon, or at least a consulted upon, new methodology? Any issues with that? And Lucy, that first meeting, Scott, Kevin, that's September the 23rd or something like that, is it? 28th? So we'll have time, so people can factor that into their budgets there, but also that agreement that we'd want to deploy that money soon, because otherwise it's just sitting in our coffers where it could, you know, buy a book for a free school meals child or whatever, and that's important to get that done. Ian.
Can I just ask about, so the DFE mandatory statement around that the places have to be necessary in the next 3 to 5 years, who's going to make that call? Because obviously for some schools that is questionable.
That's based on the SCAP data, and I think we've already checked that out for this year, and the schools were eligible. Is that correct, Henry? The SCAP data.
We look at the capacity of schools compared to the permanent PAN and then the temporary PAN. So we've got a constant update on that based on the numbers that schools give our admissions team. So yeah, we've got that data available to us.
So would every school be eligible based on that data?
No. As I said, it varies across the borough. Some schools are 100% or more, or in the high 90s. So yeah, we can go away and look at the exact figures if that'd be helpful.
Because I think as part of the consultation, a school would need to know whether they were excluded from even being able to access the funding based on that data.
We can provide that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Henry. So we can note that as an action. That would be great. Thank you, Ian. And again, I think that's right, isn't it? Because it's not just about falling roles. It's the, you know, as a head that had less than 65% capacity, but it was growing, it was still blooming hard. So it's around just having a lower role rather than just the falling role as well, and making sure colleagues are meeting that. I think that's really, really important. Any more on that? So Melanie, perhaps if Lucy and myself, you can get together and just plan a quick call, possibly not today, on what we can do next, and just and then once we do that with possibly Esther and Rachel, if you have time to then work out what that consultation will look like to get out to people with a sort of sensible deadline of a week or two into the new academic year. Okay, yeah. Thank you, everyone. Next, I've put my papers all over the place. Next, we're looking at the 23-24 outturn.
Thanks, Ash. It's back to me again.
Thank you, Scott.
This is on page 32 or D1 in the pack, and this outlines the total DSG budget. Well, this is the outturn position essentially, as long as the budget. So there's a few things that we need to approve and note that we'll cover at the end. So if we look at page 32 D1, this outlines the total DSG budget for 2023-24, which was 89.205 million after recoupment. We also received 2 additional sources of funding within the High Needs block outside of this allocation. And that is the 3.410 million that we received in safety valve funding and the 2.4 million we received in council funding. The final DSG outturn position is in the table on page 33 or on D2. Kingston had an overspend of 5.686 million before safety valve and council funding. 6.092 million of this was in the high needs block, which I'm going to cover in a little bit more detail just in a minute. We had 4.689 million cumulative DSG overspend in the DSG after receiving the safety valve and council funding, which was a decrease of 124,000 compared to the 2022-23 carry forward number. Part of the reason for that decrease, though, was the additional safety valve funding we received right at the end of the financial year, which was essentially taken from this 2024-25's allocation of safety valve funding. Page 36 shows the high needs table, so that's on D5, page 36. So I just want to go through three main areas of why we saw an increase in spend within the high needs block. So those three areas were top ups academies. This increased by 837,000 compared to 2022-23. Now, 500,000 of that was within the special school areas within the academy sector. So we had an MFG element, the 3% MFG element that we had to fund, and there was no additional funding provided by the ESFA. And also the number of places within special schools also increased in year. So that was 500,000 of that 837,000. 300,000 was a movement between a drop in the maintained sector and the academy. So that was net nil, essentially. It was due to academisation in year. The independent sector went up by 800,000. There was an increase of 20 places compared to March 2023. 13 of those 20 were in the 20 to 50,000 pound range, so quite significant. And one of those places was over 150,000 a year in placement value. And the last area I just want to touch upon was in post 16. This went up by 820,000 compared to the previous year. That was due to an increase of 38 places. A lot of this data wasn't included in the table, so I can include that if needed moving forward in schools form reports. Essentially what I'm doing here is I'm showing what the difference between outturn spend was in 2023-24 compared to outturn spend in 2022-23. Provided that as part of our discussions in the high needs subgroup. And I think it was quite useful to look at the differences in spend in certain areas rather than just looking at overspend. The last thing I just want to touch upon is the school balances, which are found on page 41 and 42 of the report pack. Maintained balances increased by 972,000 to leave them at 6.784 million in school revenue reserves. And academy and free school balances, which are taken from the ESFA DFE data, increased by 176,000 to leave school reserves in the sector at 16.819 million. So as per the page 32, the recommendations are that schools form notes the DSG allocation in 2023-24 was 89.205 million, and we need schools form to approve the cumulative carry forward of 4.689 million overspend into 2024-25. Sorry, that was a whistle stop tour there, Ash, but
thank you, Scott. So yeah, any questions first before we move on to A, note, and B, approve the carry forward? Okay, so consider it noted. I think the important question is, what if we choose not to vote the carry forward? What, just for people to be aware of the sort of, it's not much of a decision really, but yeah.
It's a good question, Ash, which I don't know the answer to, but Lucy may.
Sorry, Scott, I should have said that the other day. Sorry.
No, it's fine. Essentially, if Forum didn't approve the carry forward of the overspend, we would have to write to the Secretary of State to get permission to carry it forward. And, you know, the questions that are likely to be asked is, you know, where do Forum disagree with the spending in the high needs block? I.e., there has to be a reason sort of not to approve the spend, if that makes sense. The purpose of Forum is obviously to oversee all the spending in the DSG, and by not approving, you'll say actually there's spend in there that we disagree with, i.e. we don't think it should have been applied to the dedicated schools grant in the year. We obviously provide this information to provide assurance about how the money is being spent. Happy to answer questions if there is anything in the spend that people disagree with.
I was only just so that people knew that that's what it would be. It's essentially a fait accompli, but that just so that we know that it's not, there's nothing to be going in there and saying. My only question I think it's important to note is two things with that carry forward. One, my question would be in terms of the council funding, have we ever any indication that's going to continue next year? Because that's obviously significant. Lucy?
Yeah, I can answer that one. So those discussions haven't happened yet. They'll happen over the autumn as part of the sort of wider budget discussions in the council.
Okay, if we could have an update for that. And then secondly, just what's the status of the safety valve agreement?
So yeah, in terms of the safety valve, yeah, so in terms of the safety valve, at the moment, because we received some of the safety valve money early, i.e., as Scott explained, it was brought forward from 24-25, we actually are broadly consistent with the sort of maximum threshold of deficit that was set within that agreement. We are expecting, though, just to be clear, this year, so in 24-25, to kind of breach that maximum threshold, and we're being really transparent with the DfE about, you know, the fact that actually spend is more than the money that we're getting in. At the moment, all indications are, though, that we will continue to be able to claim the maximum amount of safety valve funding in 24-25, and 24-25 is the final year of safety valve funding. So we expect to have been able to claim the full 30 million over the 5 years. We did, in our last submission to the DfE, request a meeting to talk about the pressures in Kingston, to talk about what does this look like after the safety valve ends, because we clearly still have an in-year shortfall, and without action, that deficit will just start to accumulate up again to sort of unsustainable levels. And we did, about a week ago, hear back from the DfE sort of asking for potential dates to discuss that. So we're hopeful that over the next sort of 6 weeks, we'll be able to have a date in the diary with the DfE, and we'll know more about what things look like beyond the safety valve period. I mean, the DfE are assured that we're doing everything we can, but we're kind of really emphasising that the problem hasn't gone away.
Which I assume will be happening nationally. Scott?
Just to add to Lucy's point right at the end, we also made it clear when we put the deficit management plan together back in 2018, Lucy, in 2017 potentially, that 2025-26 financial year in particular was going to be very challenging for Kingston, and that we wouldn't have been able to balance the high needs block by the date. And DfE stated at the time, Lucy, didn't they, that they would look at 2025-26 nearer the time, which is now. So hopefully we'll be able to have those discussions with DfE soon, so we can come up with a solution for 2025-26.
Thank you very much, Scott. So I'll draw a line under that now. Anyone object to the authorising of the carry forward? Please raise your hand. I assume we're unanimous, Kev? Thank you.
We are unanimous.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Scott and Lucy, for all the work that goes into that and all the things that happen in the background on that. I know it's not easy. Well, I don't know, but I assume it's not. Okay, on to finance update and 25-26 budget setting timetable.
Still me, I'm afraid.
Don't be scared.
Page 43, E1 is this one. So this is the equivalent report for 2024-25, showing what our projection is likely to be at the end of this financial year. So on page 43, this shows the 2024-25 DSG allocation of 188.83 million before recruitment and 97.894 million after recruitment. So again, we have these two funding sources that are outside of this allocation. We've already mentioned the safety valve, which stands at 1.59 million. That's the remaining amount of the 30 million that we've got left to claim, and the 2.4 million in council funding. On page 44, this shows the projected DSG outturn for 2024-25, and this is at 7.439 million overspend, and 7.736 million is within the high needs block. So again, I'll drill down in that a little bit more detail in a second. This unfortunately would see an increase in our cumulative overspend by 3.449 million. So we'd end up with a cumulative overspend, if this is correct, at the end of the financial year of 8.138 million. Page 47 shows the high needs block overspend data. So let's move on to that table. The main increases compared to 2023-24 are projected in two main areas currently. And I've done the same thing that you won't be able to necessarily see on the report. I've compared what our projection is for 2024-25 and spending in these areas compared to the outturn in 2023-24. So the two main areas are post-16, where we've seen an increase of a potential £750,000. Again, this is due to increase in pupil numbers. We're projecting an increase of 39 pupils in this area. And top-ups academies, again, increase of 393,000 compared to 2023-24. And that's, again, it's increase in special school places. And Henry alluded to that earlier when we was talking about school place planning. If we move on to page 51, this shows the 2025-26 budget planning timetable, which is very similar to the timetable that we had last year. Consultation 1 will be relating to Central School Services Block and de-delegated amounts, and Mel and Lucy have both talked about that consultation already. So as per page 43, the recommendations are that schools forum note the DSG allocation for 2024-25, which is 97.894 million after recruitment. The schools forum note the projected DSG overspend position of 7.439 million, and note the budget setting timetable for 2025-26, but approves the consultation that we just talked about on page 51 and 52.
Any questions on that from anyone? Funny how the questions always go down towards the end of a meeting. So in terms of noting the DSG allocation, I see no issue with that. In terms of the projected DSG, I think it's important for us to hear, and this might well come in terms of the SEND Futures plan, but I suppose my question was going to be, what are we doing to mitigate that? Is that going to come up in the SEND Futures plan? Fine, perfect. So we'll note that, question asked, and that's it. 'Cause I think it's important. We can't just keep rolling and just accepting because it's become the norm. So for anyone new to this, it has, you know, I've had the privilege of sitting here for nearly 10 years on this forum, and it has always been the thing, but I think it's important that we don't just go into the, well, we've always had a deficit, so that, you know, but important to note that. Councillor Shaper.
Thank you so much. Just a really quick question. Two things I've just seen when I compare D5 with E5. When you look at the high needs block for 2023, 24 and 24-25, can I make an assumption that actually it has improved on the independent placements? Because it looks like there was a variance of 2.295 million. And then on here, you've got a variance of 824,000. That's quite a big reduction. So can I assume that's actually a positive?
Yeah, so actually, when we look at the outturn position, it's difficult to look at the outturn, the actual variance position. It's difficult to look at the variance position between now and last year because of the differences in budget. Now, we know we don't have enough budget. So when we're looking at those budget lines, it depends where that gets allocated within those lines. However, you are right in picking up that the independent placements, the projection versus the outturn from last year has dropped by 378,000, which is a really positive move.
I think so.
That actually shows that we're utilising placements in Borough more effectively potentially, and we're not relying as heavily on independent placements, which again goes in line with some of the stuff that Henry was saying earlier. So that is a positive step forward, and actually not the norm when we're talking about independent placements. So we've seen a steady increase, it's been plateauing over the last few years, but a steady increase over the last few years. And actually, yes, that spend is projected to drop by the end of this year.
May I quickly just ask, would that kind of explain why the 24-25 variance you mentioned about the increase in pupil numbers? Because if you look, it's gone from like sort of 169,000 to 745. And then also, obviously, not so much change in the top-ups for academies. But if you were looking at this, would you say that would be one of the biggest areas of actual change in variance?
Yeah, so the biggest areas of change are certainly in post-16 and the top-ups academies. In both of those, because of pupil numbers, the top-ups academies includes all the special schools, the in-borough special schools, which is why we see that increasing spend. But not as significant as from 2022-23 to 2023-24 because we no longer have that 3% MFG increase. But post-16 is the main area of increase. Now, again, this is because it's solely due to pupil numbers, and when the DfE expanded to the age range up to 25 through the education, health and care plans, essentially we've got less dropping off the end than we have coming up through the system, and we're going to see this trend in post-16 moving forward quite significantly.
Yeah, hence why there's an emphasis on that post-16 offer,
exactly,
to ensure there isn't that big drop off when you after 16, and you get your forecasting accurate in that sense.
Precisely
Thank
that.
you so much, because I was just trying to work out that percentage of variance, which I wanted to see but couldn't quite get to it. And so obviously the biggest variance is in the post-esteem, probably followed by the top-ups in maintained. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
What I can do is for future reports, I'll include a table that compares 2024 spend,
Lovely.
2023 spend, because I think that might be helpful. And we
It
did
would be
discuss
very
that in the
helpful.
high needs
Thank you very much. I would certainly, I don't know about anyone else, but I would certainly love to see that sort of summarised in terms of percentage variance. Would be fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I think it is right to note that while I was saying 10 years, blah, 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 one thing that has really gone down is the spend on private. And thank you for everyone that's doing that. I'm going to start rushing along because I'm conscious colleagues have got break duties coming up soon. Rachel?
I was just going to say quickly that I presume that we're going to be lobbying the new government around SEN and SEN funding.
Yes, certainly.
Yeah, I was going to say, so obviously Kingston Local Authority will be doing that, and will probably draw in partners as well. I also attended a meeting that the LGA hosted of sort of all local authorities across the country, and SEND is the sort of top children's issue on their agenda for picking up with the sort of the new government. So yeah, I think there'll be a lot happening at a national level, regional as well as local level in that space.
Thank you, Lucy. So I think we're happy that we note the DSC allocation, that we note the projected DSC with those challenges that we said that will be covered in the SEND Futures plan. But again, that we don't want to rest on our laurels about that, and we would like to see and work with AFC to continually, reduce that, so that in this Valhalla that may exist, we don't need the 2.4 million from the council, and we don't need the safety valve. And finally, is there any objection to approving the budget setting timetable? If you wish to say no, please raise your hand. Okay, I'll take that as unanimous, Kev. Moving on to item 10, Sam, alternative.
Chair, before we go forward.
Yep.
Can we agree that if I look at the third point, 2.1 approves the consultation with schools?
Yes, sorry, that was what the timetable and consultation. Thank you, Kevin. It's important to note that. Yeah. Okay, have we got Sam Axby? I can see her there. Very
Yes,
nice
morning
background,
everyone. So shall I just give a quick summary?
Please, thank you.
Yeah, so as per the brief paper, in short, the amount that Malden Oaks has received per alternative provision place has significantly reduced over the past 10 years, as you can see there. And obviously, as everyone knows, costs have significantly risen. The way that we've managed this over the past few years is by economies of scale. So we've taken other work on and we've extended the services that we provide, and that has helped us a lot. And also we have been using up our reserves gradually over every year. We're in a situation now, by the end of this year, we will have depleted all of our reserves. So we do need to look at the fact that what we receive in order to deliver this provision is well, wholly inadequate. What I've done so far is not replace 3 staff who are retiring at the end of this week, 3 teachers. But obviously that does mean that we don't have enough capacity to educate the numbers that we're currently asked to do for Kingston, which is 45. So on the assumption that there's no more money, the proposal that I've put in the paper is that we could reduce the number of places, which would mean that the cost per place would rise. Not quite to the amount it really needs to, but it's sort of moving in the right direction. So that's the summary really. Ash, I don't know if you want to ask if people have got any questions.
And just Lucy, what's the outcome of this? We're not voting on this today, are we?
No, so Schools Forum need to make a recommendation into AFC around the number of places, or if Schools Forum feel that the number of places needs to remain the same, then there needs to be a recommendation about where the additional funding could come from. We've just heard sort of about the financial position in the high needs block. There isn't significant extra money this year.
And we're talking from September, I assume.
Yeah.
Okay. Any thoughts, questions from colleagues? So again, we're being asked to make a recommendation. I don't know if we'll be in a place to do that by the end of this meeting, to be very honest with you. And we'll be recommending the increase in there, and I totally understand everything Sam's saying and the great work that's done there. So any thoughts and questions on that from colleagues? Ian, Kiri.
Thanks, Ash. I'll put that down. Two things, I suppose. So the places offered cover span Richmond and Kingston, don't they?
These places referred to in the paper are only the Kingston places.
Okay,
So
right.
Richmond have 30 places, but they're in addition to these ones that we're talking about.
So is this discussion also happening with
Yes.
them in terms of
Yeah.
reduction in numbers?
Yeah.
Okay. Right. And I've now forgotten my second question, which isn't very helpful at all. That's actually, it's about really, have you filled that every year, Sam? And for how? So the 45 places, is that at capacity? I think you normally are, aren't you?
Yes, obviously right now we have a few weeks at this time of year where we are lower because of the large number of year 11s that leave us, but you're right, Ian, across most of the year we are full and actually with a waiting list. So it's not that there's not the demand, it's more about how we can actually deliver the provision we need to within the budget, which, as I say, has gone down significantly since well, over the last decade.
So it's how we can make this work financially for you.
Yeah.
And support the students in the local authority. Okay. And schools. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Ian. Councillor Shaper.
Thank you very much. Just a really quick question. I was just interested to know in terms of risk, what that would mean if there was any potential for permanent exclusions to rise. Because obviously you don't want to have an impact like that further on down the line, or even in an immediate short-term risk. Could you give me a sense of what sort of short, medium, long-term risk? Thank you.
Well, yes, I mean, you're absolutely right. And there are some local authorities who only deliver the statutory provision, which means, in fact, their places in their alternative provision are only for permanently excluded students. Obviously, I'm sure everybody shares the view that we don't really want to go down that road, because actually waiting until a child's got to that stage is not good for them at all. However, so there is a risk, you're absolutely right, there is a risk of permanent exclusions rising, and I think in those other local authorities where they don't have the facility to have the dual reg places and prevent permanent exclusion, we see much higher rates of permanent exclusion. So yeah, I can't deny that absolutely is a risk. The other thing is, of course, that if you decrease funding in one area, you're likely to see an increase in another. So, for example, we can see that in terms of the increase in students being referred for medical provision and or for requests for EHCPs. So yes, we can't actually stem the need. All we're really doing is juggling between different budgets in terms of how we meet that need.
Thank you, Sam. Can I know I'm really conscious of time. Would that have an alignment with any sort of direction of travel on the Send Futures plan as well? Because I know that's in the report in terms of EHCP impact.
Yes, I mean, as I say, there will be an impact elsewhere, and I'm aware of that. I can't deny it. But equally, I have to find a way of managing the budget that we've got.
Okay, thank you.
Rachel.
I don't understand completely how it works, but you're saying there's some dual placement. Does that mean the secondary school give you money to have their children?
So the way the 45 places cover basically three main groups of children. So there's the ones that come through the fair access panel, where they need a period of time before we can decide if they're suitable for mainstream or not. There are the permanently excluded children that we have a statutory duty to educate, and then there are the dual registered ones who are often at risk of permanent exclusion. For the dual registered placements, so we receive the same amount for all of those regardless of type. For the dual registered ones, the schools pay a contribution which is equivalent to the ORPU on a sessional basis. So that amount is recouped from the school. That goes into that goes into AFC, so we don't receive any more than that, but it is sort of subsidised, if you like. So the ORPU amount used to account for, I think, about 1/5 of the place cost. Now I think it's more like 40%. So the idea was that, yeah, the schools would give that amount that they would normally have received for that pupil, and that continues, even though it's a much smaller, larger percentage now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Scott?
Just to clarify, the amount that's received back into the DSG, into the high needs box, it's about £60,000 a year that gets recouped through that ORPU amount. So it's actually, it's quite I know it seems like a large amount of money, but from the actual budget that goes across the Malden Oaks, that's actually quite a very small percentage of the money that comes back into the high needs block.
I don't feel comfortable making a recommendation without all heads having an involvement. I don't know what we do with that constitutionally, Lucy, but I think it would be unfair of me to and the 3 or 4 heads on the call to make that recommendation. So I don't know what we do here. Sam, I hope you understand that's not for anything other than, no Amy, no David Smith, no, I just don't think that would be fair. So Lucy, what would we do in that situation?
There's 2 options. One, we could add this as a question into the summer consultation and have a decision in September, or alternatively we could do a sort of a virtual, if we say schools forum actually won't be making this recommendation, it will be, for example, head teachers, we could do a virtual vote kind of via email after you've had your sort of next primary and secondary head meetings.
If we could then speak to heads and see which of those they prefer, but I think it's quite an not operational, Sam, I know it's huge, but it's colleagues day to day. And I've had things done to me by committees that can't remember or operate there. So I think it's really important that we get the voice of all the secondary heads and primary heads indeed that do use it, and some of them more than others, right? On there. So if there's any objection to that, I would suggest that's what we do, is delegate some of that, or not delegate, but give the opportunity for others to contribute. Sorry, Rachel.
So just one last one. I presume, though, if we are going to try and find some funding, it would come from everybody, not just secondaries.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when I was saying heads, I wasn't just meaning secondary heads. It has to be everyone, because it's the high needs budget, which, the majority of high needs do come from primary, because the majority of our children are in primary, and I think that's really important to know. Also, we would need some sort of understanding of the impact on the rest of the high needs budget.
Yeah, so what I'd suggest then is if we put together a kind of a briefing document with some questions, and we can issue that and then sort of bring that to sort of secondary and primary heads leading into a decision at the September forum. Does that work for everyone?
We want to be as supportive as we can to Sam, but we just want to know what that support looks like, really. Okay, thank you very much, Sam. Thank you, Lucy. Kevin?
So can I say that we won't be making a recommendation? It'll go to the summer meeting.
Thank you. And then just noted that whatever decision is made, if there is a decision to do that, that we work as hard as we can to expedite that funding.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sam, anything else you wanted to add on that? And thank you for doing that.
No, that's fine. Thanks, Ash.
Thanks, Sam. Okay, I believe we then send futures plan.
That's me, Ashley. I was saying Ash. Ashley has gone to the Isle of Wight, as you know, so I have the excitement of overseeing the Send Futures Planner. So I think there were 2 parts to this, really. One was, which I think we've probably covered, is noting the performance against the safety valve recommendations. I think that's been covered in terms of performance there. And then the other bit really was just to talk to you about the implementation of the Send Futures Plan, which some of you may feel is less exciting and interesting than those of us who work a lot on this. But actually, a lot of the points that we've discussed and that we talked about in terms of the high needs subgroup, the Send Futures is holding a lot of those really big initiatives that are impacting on the things that you have talked about. So SRPs, therapies, school place planning, special school places, EHC needs assessments. So your reps are Rachel from primary, and Sean comes from secondary as well. So the Send Futures plan was in place, the initial version. We updated it and refreshed it in April 2024 with new terms of reference and a new way of working, really. So we've sort of embedded some aspects of it as business as usual, with some of the things that we really worked on now feeling are just core business for us. So the themes continue of participation, working with young people, engaging co-production. We've talked about the increasing post-16 cohort here. And so that preparation and maximising independence is really important. So we've got some really exciting work moving forward about our supported internships, potential post-16 campus, flexible offers for post-16 pathways, which should, if we do it well, impact on some of those post-16 costs as well. We look a lot at our workplace and commissioning. So those are the 4 themes. And then within that, the 3 key areas of transformation, and they do include all the things you've talked about, are early intervention and assessment that looks at waiting lists, but also a big focus is a therapies project plan in there. Our local offer looking at special school places, also post-16, and then the whole kind of assessment and planning of the SEND process, core activity, moving to digitalisation of EHC plans and there. So each of those work streams has project plans within it. We're in the early stages of the new plan, and we're just about to do our first quarter report back to the DfE. So the DfE very much see that as the vehicle and the confidence that we are doing all we can locally to support all the things that we have talked about. Whether we will manage to save £8 million is another question, but certainly a lot of the initiatives they're about improving the offer and the provision that we have for our children and young people, but also, you know, doing the very best we can locally within the resources that we have. So it is, you know, I think a relevant plan, and actually, although it probably feels very far removed to a lot of you, I think it is very important in terms of the scrutiny for high needs and the things that we want to take forward locally. My last point really was just, we've talked a lot about the school population and kind of increase, decrease, but the population of children with needs and EHC plans is increasing alongside that slight decrease in the primary population. So we're not seeing a decrease in the children who have additional needs. The requests for EHC needs assessments are just stabilised, but stabilised at the increase we have had previously, so not back to where they were 5-7 years ago. So yeah, that's kind of an update, and I think all we have to do on that, Ash, is update the performance and the implementation of it.
Thank you, Charis. Yeah, so just forum has to, unless there are any questions. And Charis, thank you for that, all the work on that. You know, sometimes you guys put loads into the paper and then we skim over it, but please know it's noted and read. So we just need to note the performance against the safety valve agreement. Safety valve agreement is in there as Appendix B, and then we need to just note the progress that Charis has done. And thank you, Charis, for taking that on from Ashley. To note the progress with the implementation of the SEND Future Plan. So is there anything else on the SEND Futures Plan? Anyone? Okay, thank you all very much. Next is the scheme for financing schools, which will be a vote, but is only a maintained schools only vote. Lucy, is this you?
No, that was me again.
Sorry, Melanie.
No,
I'll get it right at some point.
That's fine. So yeah, this is the annual approval of the scheme for financing schools, and you're right, it applies to maintained schools only. The Academy and Free Schools one is set by the DfE separately. There's been no directed changes. The only update this year was to reflect the most up-to-date financial reporting treatment for leases, and that's the only change that's been in there. And then it would be for forum. If this is agreed, we will get this updated on the LA website and we'll send it out to schools as well.
And my understanding, Melanie, Lucy, Scott, is that we have always approved this for maintained schools. So I think with that, for those maintained schools in there, is there anyone that wishes to vote against the scheme for financing schools? Okay, fantastic. And just to know that change to the leases, I believe, just brings maintained and academies in line with each other, doesn't it? So it's okay. Kevin, if we know anyone on there, or are we unanimous?
It was unanimous, Chair.
What a collaborative bunch we all are. So that brings to any other updates. Are there any other updates from anyone?
Chair, if I could ask you to just note the apologies. We didn't do apologies at the beginning.
Yeah, thank you.
And I have recorded apologies for Claudia Hovendijk, Sean Mayer, Carol Buchanan, and Lucy Mastrocola.
Thank you, Kevin.
Had actually sent apologies, but was in the meeting.
Thank you very much.
Said any.
If there are no other updates, the next meeting will be on the 23rd of September. And in a treat, because we agreed that we would do one in real life and then the rest online during the morning, that's going to be at 4 o'clock somewhere. Have we got a location?
In the council chamber.
In the council chamber.
Guildhall.
Fantastic. In the council chamber at Guildhall at 4 o'clock. Just another end of a schools forum year. Thank you, everyone, for giving up your time and coming here. I never sit down more than I sit down on this, so I'm looking forward to stretching my legs. Thank you to everyone at AFC for the hard work that you do. And Kevin, thank you for making me not look terrible throughout the year. Have a lovely summer for those of you that get one, and thanks all. And as far as an email or a text, if we can do that, and then Lucy and officers will get together about some of the actions on those as well. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, Ash.